Welcome to today's presentation on automated pond grading with CTC's new tool called AutoGrader. This is all in Civil 3D using native Civil 3D functionality with AutoGrader running on top of Civil 3D. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I am the Civil Product Manager here at CTC Software, and I will be giving the presentation today. So with that, I wanted to mention briefly what AutoGrader is. Many of you have probably heard of it. Perhaps you've even tried it out already. We just released it a couple weeks ago, and it aims to take what are normally very tedious site grading type workflows in Civil 3D and totally change the game and make it way more easy, way more dynamic, and less tedious. So what AutoGrader does is it works with native feature lines, but instead of you having to manually edit and manage all these vertices and feature lines, we can link feature line sets through what we call grading families in AutoGrader. You define these parameters in grading families. It gives you a preview of what you're creating as you create it. You reference a set of parent feature lines, and then it creates child feature lines based on parameters you define. You can refresh these families, and then your change or your designs will update with them. All of the feature lines, the break lines, they're all managed by AutoGrader. They get added to the surface automatically, and you have control over that level of detail in the surface triangulation itself. AutoGrader will manage the styles and layers and sites for all of your grading. And you can even save out templates. In this case, is an example of a curb where I might use this over and over on multiple drawings or multiple projects. You can save those out to quickly reload this rule-based design family, this grading family. So the way it works, there's two primary types of grading families. One is parallel, where you're defining one or more parent feature lines like the blue one here, and then you're creating automated 3D offsets from those. So many of you might be familiar with the 3D offset command for feature lines. Imagine that, but you could program in all these different parameters and settings and then just execute on them all at once so that you could create and grade out an entire pond in a matter of seconds, or generate curb lines, or any number of things. That's a parallel grading family. The second type is a perpendicular, where you're grading perpendicularly from a parent feature line. In this example, it might be a right-of-way line, and then you're grading out lots. Now, in that example, and I did do a video on this recently, grading out subdivisions in this way. You can grade existing lines that you already have, or create new lines, meaning actually lay out your lots and grade them at the same time. A third one we have coming very soon is a template-based one where it'll automatically insert one or more sets of feature lines, kind of a unique set, perhaps a house pad like this, and it'll insert them along some kind of path you define. Think of it like an array, a path array, which is a basic AutoCAD command, but it actually does all the grading. It works with feature lines, and it adds everything to the surface and so forth. So that's an overview of AutoGrader. What I really want to do, though, is spend time in Civil 3D and show you how this functions in a pond grading scenario. Now, I've done, like I said, a number of webcasts on AutoGrader. I'll continue to do them to highlight different workflows and different use cases. But of course, I look to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear ways you are using it, new workflows, and of course, if there's particular features that you'd like to see in there. We always want to hear that as well. So today's focus, a fairly simple focus, just detention pond grading. Okay, how does that work? How is that faster? How is that easier? How is that more dynamic with AutoGrader? And that's what I want to highlight today. And so we're going to start with a situation here. It's kind of a commercial site, but it could be any kind of project. And by the way, we're talking about pond grading here, but it could be maybe you do landfill design, or anything that of a similar geometry, right? You're going to find what I show you today applicable to those workflows as well. So I'm going to start out by sketching just with a polyline what's going to be a fairly arbitrary pond shape. And I'm going to start with a polyline here. And we're going to give ourselves kind of an initial shape to work with, something that works with my site, something that I think roughly matches kind of the volumes I need. Okay. However you sketch this out, that's up to you. Some of you might make much more kind of rigid ponds. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Now, what would you do here? You'd perhaps turn this into a feature line normally, right? And then you'd start doing stepped offsets, and that would work great and everything, right? And you'd add your feature lines to the surface. But then things change and you got to refresh everything, and it takes a lot of time. And let's face it, a gradient on a pond is not an overly complicated thing. Why should I have to spend a lot of time with it? And so AutoGrader, I'm going to show you how it really just kind of speeds this up so you don't have to spend a lot of time on this stuff. So we're going to create a feature line out of this. So still just native workflow so far. And I'm going to utilize the same site while I go through this, but I'm going to be utilizing feature line styles in not just a visual way, but in a functional way. And I'm going to explain that more as I go on here. But I have a variety of feature line styles in here. I'm going to take advantage of feature line hierarchy. This is something that dovetails very nicely with AutoGrader. And you'll see how as we move along. So I'm going to use a style that I've called parent. So I don't use styles to really control the formatting. Like I said, I use it to control behavior between intersecting and interacting feature lines. We can go ahead and put this on a simple pond layer that we have. This. And we're going to assign elevations, and I believe based on existing grade, we're going to start out at an 832.5. We can always adjust that after the fact. So I've got a 3D view here going as we create this so you can get a visual of what's being created. Now here's where AutoGrader comes in. You define some kind of base, or what I call parent feature lines, and then all the detail is taken care of by AutoGrader. So instead of going in and starting to offset everything, we'll define a family in AutoGrader that spells out the entire shape, all the geometry of our pond, and we can simply execute on that, and it'll generate everything at once. I'm going to kind of step us through this because I want you guys to understand and learn how AutoGrader works. So I'll take more time with it than I might otherwise if I was just working on the project myself. So I'm going to delete some of these out of here. We're going to start with just a clean slate. And what these are grading families. Okay. So this is the main dialog of AutoGrader. You start by creating a grading family. Now here's that options, those options where you can choose which type of grading family. We're going to be doing a parallel option where the green lines represent the child or automatically created feature lines, and the blue one represents the parent feature line. Okay, this launches a dialog box for us, and we'll just go ahead and call this family pond. First thing is to select a parent feature line. That's simply going to be this one I just sketched out here. And then we define our grading children, okay? So I come over here and create a new one, and we'll call this one here slope. So each row that I create here, and I can create as many as I want, each row represents a new feature line that's going to be created. We have an anchor component. Right now that's going to be to the parent feature line. We're going to go a distance at a slope. And notice all these other methods in here. Any way you might want to define a relationship between your child and your parent feature lines, you can do that in here, including sloping to surface, distance to surface, right? So we handle all that, tying into surfaces or daylighting the surfaces. All that functionality is in here as well. You may have used the native grading tools, but of course they're super buggy, right? You run into all kinds of problems with them. Some of you may use them to generate a feature line and then delete the grading object itself, but you end up having to recreate that every time. AutoGrader will just handle all this surface tying in, this daylighting for you. Okay, and then what side do we go to? Okay, we can go right or left, but if it's a closed poly or feature line like this, you might want to be thinking in terms of inwards or outwards. So we'll choose inwards. Now, because I chose slope to surface, we want to distance that slope. Sorry about that. Distance that slope, we'll go inwards. We'll go a distance of 10 and a slope of, I can type in ratios here, so I can do 3 to 1, and then it formats how it normally does it. So you can type in percent or ratios. Now that's going to generate a feature line. As soon as I click run, we'll see that show up. But what layer is that going to land on? What style? Okay, what site is it going to go into? That's where the formatting comes in. And come in here and I'll see my families, or excuse me, the children that I've created. So we want to give it a style of child. Okay, and we'll talk about that just in a moment here. We're going to put it on the layer called pond child, and then we're going to put it in a site called building site. Okay. Now you might have noticed those settings in there. There's a family default. We can get this to all of these to match a family default, so every child feature line automatically just lands in that site. Okay, or you can spell them out separately like this. Let's go ahead and run this so you can just see this created. I click the run button, boom, there's our child feature line, shows up over here. I'm also going to close out of this. Some of you may have noticed there's a surface option here. And I said in the introduction that AutoGrader manages all of your break lines and your surfaces as well. So we're going to turn this on. You don't have to do this right out of the gate. Perhaps you're just generating feature lines. And we're going to add these to the proposed surface. Now, when you, in a native workflow, add break lines to a surface, you get prompted with a dialog box about the level of detail or the supplementing factors. This plays a huge role in how your contours look and how the surface overall looks. So we have those settings embedded right in here, and it'll automatically assign these for you. So I'm going to run supplementing factors at 25 feet. What that means is it will be triangulating at least every 25 feet. And then I've got a mid-ordinate distance. Let's go 0.5 on this. And there's also weeding options. I'm going to stick with that. Now, if I click run, we also have that option here. You're going to see that surface generated, and we'll see it showing up in 3D here as well. Okay. Now, that level of detail I was talking about, that's how much triangulation we're getting along these feature lines. That's looking pretty good. One of the things I really like about AutoGrader as well is that if I want to change it, I can do that at any time, and it'll basically refresh that whole break line set. Normally, you'd have to delete everything from the surface, add it back in to change your break line settings. Here, we can just come in, set this to 10. Let's say I want to dial this down to 0.2. I'll hit OK, and now watch when I click run, I'll get a higher level of detail in my surface, more triangulation, okay? If it's a huge site, right, with large parameters, you don't need as much detail, otherwise your drawings get bogged down. If it's a more detailed commercial site, you know, dial up the detail to the level you need it. And now we can go back into the grading family and continue to spell out the rest of our pond. This one, we'll call this a bench. We're going to go anchored to the slope component. So notice I have two different components I can anchor to now. That's this one right up here that I called slope. I'm going to anchor to that. We're going to go a distance at a slope inwards, and this will be 3 feet at a negative 10%. Click at the formatting. Okay, it's defaulting to the previous one here. Now if I go ahead and click run, we'll see that additional feature line created and the surface updating. Okay, now you get an idea how quick this can be here, right? Let's just go in, let's make our second slope, we'll call it slope 2. We'll anchor to the bench. We're going to make a copy of the bench. That one will go, call it bench 2, but this one will anchor to slope 2. Notice as I'm doing this, this preview is updating with every edit I make, right? So as I change things along the way here, like a bench of 5, I get a bigger bench down there and it shows me that visually. Sometimes it can be difficult as you're spelling out complex grading families in here to understand what you're creating, right? So that's why we give this cross-sectional preview down here. So it's really intuitive. Let's go ahead and run this, see what we've got so far. Okay. Now let's say I want to go, let's create one more. We'll call it slope 3. And this will go down to the bottom of our pond. We'll anchor to bench 2. We'll continue at inwards. Let's go 15 at a negative 25. I can run that. Okay. Really fast, right? Really easy to do. And one of the main points of this is not to just, run stepped offset for you 5 times really quickly. It's to keep it all dynamic. Now, not live dynamic, but what I mean by this is if something changes, right, the shape of your pond is changing. We haven't done any volume analysis yet, but so we know this needs to be a little larger. I'm going to just make a few edits here, right? Okay. What would you normally do here? You'd go delete those feature lines in the middle, and you'd run stepped offsets again. You'd add them all back into the surface, right? All you have to do with AutoGrader is come back in here, run this again, and everything updates. Okay, huge time savings. Not to mention less error prone, right? Because you've spelled out all the rules. You just tell it to refresh or update at any time. Now let's take a closer look here. Okay, now depending on what you're used to, depending on the parameters you've defined, sometimes the contouring might not work the way you want it to. And by the way, we're just making a native surface here, and how it triangulates around these feature lines, that's just native behavior. We're not controlling anything there. But depending on, sometimes you get sharper angles and the contours they skip like this. And let's say you want to make sure that they're angled right in line with the corners of this right here. Depending on that distance, they may not triangulate right. And so while AutoGrader is going to take care of the vast majority of your feature line grading, you're still going to have these little places where you want to massage your surface or your feature lines, right? So we didn't want to make AutoGrader behave in such a way that you couldn't do any kind of little overrides or anything like that. And so it works real nicely. And so I want to take an example like this one, because it's a nice little trick I like to show people how to control the triangulation. And what I would do here is, instead of just swapping triangles, which tends to be kind of a Band-Aid type fix, you end up with holes in your surface sometimes. What I instead would do is just draw a feature line between these two and throw that in the surface. But what's important is to account for feature line hierarchy. Okay, so you've seen this a little bit so far. We've got our parent feature line style and we've got our child feature line styles. Let's go over here to Prospector. Let's look at settings. And then here we're going to see I've got parent, child, and then I also have tertiary and a couple other ones here. These styles, if you take a look at your site and you right click on feature lines, this is native functionality that's been in Civil 3D for years, but it's often missed. If you go to the options tab of your feature line properties, you're going to have a list of the styles in here. And this is what is known as feature line hierarchy or feature line style hierarchy. Basically, the one at the top always controls when feature lines cross. Well, we're talking about a simple example here. Draw a feature line, throw it in the surface. But what I want to make sure is that that feature line always moves with those child feature lines that I'm creating with the pond, okay? So if I assign a style of tertiary, which is below child, that feature line will move up and down as those child feature lines move with it. Just manual tweaks you're going to want to do to your grading. So I'll hit OK to this. And then, right, now we see those green contours behaving the way we want. Now, why did we do the style that way, the styling that way? Because if I come back to AutoGrader and I'm making a change to my grading, perhaps this slope is a -3 to 1 after all, right? That's going to bring this feature line down right here. We want this feature line to move with it, to be basically dependent on these dashed bluish feature lines. So if I click Run here, you're going to see that update. What did I miss? Oh, let's run that again. And I bumped something in there. Let's go and see what we did. Go back to that 25%. Well, I'm not sure what I did there. Let's back it up a little bit. Let's go create that feature line again. Nothing like live demoing for you guys, right? We'll go ahead and delete that family out of here. Create a new one again. We'll attach it to bench 2. We'll go inwards at 15 feet, -33. There it is. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what I was doing wrong though. I will go chat with my programmer after this and see what might be malfunctioning there. But anyway, you get the idea. That what I was highlighting there is basically, and we'll do this again in a moment here, using some manual feature line work in conjunction with your AutoGrader workflow. Now let's move on. Let's put a berm on the top of this, and then let's talk about a spillway and daylighting and that kind of thing, how that works. So go into our family again, and this time I'm going to create a new component, and this one will be the berm, and we're going to anchor this to the parent. Okay, and let's go at slope to relative elevation. Okay, and we're going to go outwards. So what I'm talking about is putting a berm on the outside of the pond here. We'll go a slope of 25% and up 2 feet. And I can check my formatting. Let's put this on a different layer. Got a pond berm layer in here. We'll go ahead and run this. Oops, assigned that to the wrong one. Let's put this back. This is kind of one of the beauties of AutoGrader is all this formatting, all the styling, everything. You can change it at any point and it will update for you. Okay, so I had assigned a layer to the wrong one there. Here we go. Pond berm is assigned to the berm component. We'll hit OK. I'll run this again. Okay, that's what we're after, that berm, a different color, a different layer. And there we've got a berm. Now, it's pretty straightforward. You guys can imagine a variety of different scenarios, I'm sure. You don't have to even be starting with one pond baseline. Perhaps you've got kind of a different staged pond, multiple levels, okay? You could have other parent feature lines in there that are defining different portions of it if it's not all concentric like this. A lot of different ways to use this. But everything is based, like I said, on concentric feature lines. So what if I want to put a spillway in here? Well, again, it's kind of more one of those, it's one of those manual things. I want to decide where exactly will I put that, okay? What does the elevation look like, that sort of thing. And what can be real easy to do here is to simply draw a single feature line for your spillway. So we're going to draw a single feature line right about in here. And then we're going to take advantage of feature line style hierarchy again, so that it basically puts a cutout into our berm here. And then from there, we're going to go in daylight to existing grade, and we'll tie in from there. Okay. So that feature line style hierarchy. If I come back in here, here's the properties of my site feature lines. I've got existing, parent, okay, that's what I drew that pond baseline on. And I've got child, and then I've got tertiary. That was that little one I drew. Okay, I'm going to take advantage of this term, this one I've got called subparent. It's just another style, but it's between parent and child. And what I want to do is draw a feature line that's going to stay dependent on the parent, meaning the pond baseline, but it will control the elevations of the pond berm. So the magenta line out here is the pond berm, and it has a style of child. Okay. So here's how it works. It's pretty simple, in fact. Some of you guys have maybe used this trick in other workflows. We're going to grab subparent style. I'm going to hit OK. And actually, I'm going to back up. Let's see, where do we want to draw this thing? Let's go ahead and add one PI right in here. You can see the workflow a bit here. Okay. I'm adding a PI in there. So I've got one right here, a PI right here, and then I'm going to put my spillway in the middle. And by the way, if I add that in, right, and I refresh my grading family, that will then appear in every child feature line. So I'll go ahead and run that. Okay. And now we see the same thing in the child feature lines, those vertices showing up. Okay. We're going to take and draw a feature line, the subparent style. I'm going to go a midpoint right on this little segment, right? We had a vertex here, we had a vertex over here. We're going to snap to the midpoint of those. We're going to take the elevation it gives us from the parent feature line. Okay. Now all I'm going to do is just draw a point a little bit past that berm, like this, and then we'll go at a grade of 0. And see what it does already, right? This is based on the styling. See the spillway or the cutout that I made there? Now you can draw multiple feature lines however you want this to work, but the concept's the same. okay? Whatever happens to this feature line, the magenta one will move with it. So just as an example, if I take this and I grade instead up at a 15%, watch what happens as I hit enter here on the left side. That will move up with it, right? Set it back to 0, okay? And here's where that child star hierarchy really comes into play. The parent child, that's the pond baseline. The next one on the hierarchy list is this one. And the next one is the child, meaning whatever I do to my grading family and auto grader, this will respond to it. So for example, let's go in here, let's go into auto grader, let's edit this, let's set the berm at a relative elevation of 1.5 instead of 2, right? So we should see all of that come down right here and run this, okay? And everything comes down, but because I put that one little spillway in there, it continues to hold that, okay? So AutoGrader, if that feature line wasn't there, AutoGrader would just go straight across there, right? But AutoGrader is not going to touch any kind of manual feature lines you created, and because you use the hierarchy, we're going to force that little bend in there. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Brian, why don't you just put an elevation point right in this feature line right here, this magenta feature line, insert a low point right there? Well, that's great, so long as you don't so long as you don't run your grading family again, right? Because as soon as you do that, it's going to refresh that geometry to match the parent feature line, okay? And we want that, right? We want those child feature lines to be dynamic to the parent, right? So we let those continue that way, but then we take advantage of just a few supplementary feature lines to get what we're after. Okay, from here, let's go ahead. We're going to daylight from on this outside edge of the pond and tie into existing. Then I'm going to briefly just show you, I've got a family created already for the parking lot. We'll run that and you'll just see how it can tie in between a parking lot to a pond and how that works out. Okay, so let's go in here, come back into AutoGrader. And we're going to create a new family, and this one's just going to be the pond grading limits. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick this magenta line, and then we're going to grade through our grading limits. We're going to anchor to the parent, and we're going to go slope to surface, and let's go at a 25%, okay? And then we have our target surface. We get to choose that right in here. That's going to go to the existing surface. And then what about how it daylights? How much detail do we need in that? Okay. AutoGrader will manage the frequency or the level of detail in your daylight feature lines. This makes a big difference. What if you're daylighting or matching into an existing surface with a lot of changes in it? You probably want to have it have a fairly low number so it ties in exactly, right? So your volumes and everything are accurate, your contours match in. If it's a pretty smooth surface, you can dial that down a little bit. So let's set this at 10. Now, if you didn't turn these on, what would happen? Okay, you would get daylighting just occurring at whatever vertices exist in the parent feature line, in this case, the magenta feature line. But we want a little more detail in there. Okay, we can come into the formatting here. Let's set the layer to grading limits. And then finally, we don't want to daylight around this entire pond. So here we can actually control the station range. And this is why we put in a different family, because the other one we were executing on the entire station range. For this grading limit scenario, we only want to execute on a partial station range. So I can spell that out here. We'll come back here. I'll click run to this. And then we see it generated a feature line. And this is easy to do because we're automating so much. We can do things like this where we accidentally we daylight to the wrong side. It's not a big deal. We can always come back in here. Here's what I missed, right? I should have done outwards on this. And just so we get a little bit further out there, let's just choose a 15% grade. Now if I run this, you're going to see that daylight to the outside. We're actually really close to the existing grade. Let's go ahead and make a change so you can see how this is reflected. Let's grab these two feature lines. Let's move our entire pond up a foot. Well, up 1 foot. Okay. Come back in here. I'll run this. All of those child feature lines will update, including the surface, right? And now you can see that yet to be updated daylight feature line is sitting quite a bit lower there. So we'll come back in here. Okay, all the settings are the same. We're going to daylight off of this same feature line. And because we refreshed that whole thing, I think I got that set right. Yeah. We'll run this again. And now it generates that feature line quite a bit further out there. So if you're stacking feature lines like this, we're working on updating the code on it where it can remember the child feature line that it was attached to. Basically, when you have families built on families, there's a refreshing thing there, but it works. You just need to get rid of that old feature line. Like I said, we're going to work on updating that there. So one little thing I missed, right? The surface. We want to add this to proposed. Do some similar supplementing factors. I'm going to run that. Close out. And there's that daylight. Okay. What your pond design looks like, right, it varies, it depends. You guys have all different design standards, different preferences certainly. But from here, other things like your pond volumes, quite easy to do, right? Grab that, whatever that normal water line is. I'm going to use the parent feature line here. You just simply throw it into a different surface, okay? And then you just create a comparison. Okay, this is just native behavior here, a comparison between, so this is pond volume, comparison between that proposed surface and that pond top. And you can get your volumes right in here, okay? Now, what about tying in with the rest of the site, okay? It's pretty straightforward, right? A lot of this stuff is going to be kind of a manual thing. Let's look at this parking lot. Well, that's not going to be manual, but like tying into the existing curb here. Let's first do this. Let's come back into Auto Grader and let's grade out our parking lot. And I'd mentioned in the overview that there are templates, or you can save things out, right? So I can take like this pond design here with all of these parameters, including the formatting and everything, and I can save this out to a pond. It's just a universal file type, a JSON file. You can actually edit these in Notepad and so forth. You can save these out, and then it can be used in other drawings. Okay, so I'm going to overwrite that one. Now the reverse can be true. we want to grade this parking lot. I'll show you how quick this can be. We'll grab our parking lot curb. And I've got this going into the same surface. So all these settings are remembered. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And what it's going to do is generate a bunch of parking lot feature lines and add it to that same surface that we have. I'm going to select my parent feature lines. There we go. So this is how, in conjunction with your pond grading, you put together other components of your project, right? And if you want them to land on the same surface, you just choose the same surface here. If you want a separate surface, you can go ahead and do that. But if they're in the same surface, it'll behave like normal break lines, right? Things will just triangulate between those two. And then simple little tie-in areas, like I've got some existing curb here. I can just throw that into my surface. We're going to be tying in there, okay? Then over here, we can grab, it all depends on what you're after, right? And we're tying in right there, okay? Simply turn that into a feature line. We could grab existing elevations, throw it into the surface, or perhaps like we did on the backside of this pond, we could grade on the backside of the building here, okay? So feature lines are some of the most universal tool sets in Civil 3D. I think most of us would agree with that when it comes to grading. But they're really tedious to work with. This is the point of AutoGrader. Those of you who have used corridors, you know how quickly you can create a ton of geometry, right? Well, that only works with linear type projects and concepts. When we get to like ponds and parking lots and this kind of stuff, that's where corridors really start to fall apart. I've seen people do it. I've even taught classes on using corridors. I don't advocate it anymore because AutoGrader is so much simpler to use, so much more intuitive. And it works with the native objects in here, feature lines that all of you guys are used to. And it dovetails really easily with any kind of manual work or little kind of tweaking you might want to do. You're not tied into it kind of like you are with a corridor. You can do all that in conjunction with AutoGrader. So that's about all I wanted to show you guys. If some of you guys are new to CTC and you're wondering, how do I get this? How do I get my hands on it? It's part of what we call the CIM Project Suite. The CIM Project Suite is an entire ribbon that installs right in Civil 3D. And it comes with all sorts of tools. Here is AutoGrader, a new tool that we just released. Label Genie is another one we just released. Automated labeling, a total game changer as well. I've done recent webcasts on that as well. Be sure to check it out. So it's in the CIM Project Suite. If you're a current license holder, all you got to do is download the new installer. You can do that from the About menu in any tool. Run it, it'll upgrade all your tools. If you don't own the CIM Project Suite, get in touch with your reseller. That's ATG in the US or SolidCAD in Canada, or contact CTC. We'll get you in contact with the right people as well. So AutoGrader, it's one of the tools. It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited about it being out there now. We're continuing development on it. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. With that, I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks so much for joining me today. You guys have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful week. Take care.